Hi everyone, today is April 17th and welcome to the Hastings-on-Hudson Board of Education meeting. We're going to start by turning it over to Tony to give us our announcements.
Hi everyone, how are you? Thanks for coming out tonight. So we have a bunch of announcements and upcoming events. Our next board meeting is May 1st, but prior to that, we have our high school spring freshman peer leadership retreat that's happening on April 19th, which is later this week. And on this weekend, we have the Into the Woods musical from our high school, so that's exciting. It's Friday night at 7, Saturday night at 7, and Sunday afternoon at 1 p.m. This Friday also is a late start for our kids, so please just be aware of that. High school college financial aid night is happening on April 24th, which is next week, and that's at 7 o'clock. And then we have the AP Art Show opening at 6 o'clock, and please be there promptly because they are prompt about their beginning. I was a little late the last time. That's happening on April 25th. Also on Saturday, April 28th, we have a PTSA SEPTA-sponsored brunch budget overview situation, and that at Hillside. It's going to be good times, and that's going to be in the morning, and it'll be some open time for people to stop by and ask questions. And that same day, also that evening, SEPTA's having a fundraiser, and if you don't mind, quickly, just do you mind sharing the fact? What time is it? It start?
So 7:30, 7 to 10, Southside Athletic Club.
Great, thank you. I didn't have the details, but it's that night, April 28th. And then finally, in addition to the board meeting that's happening on May 1st, we also have a Hillside PTSA meeting happening that night at 6:30 p.m. And then just lastly, Paul Feiner, who is our town supervisor, Town of Greenberg supervisor, he is hosting a, I don't know if he is hosting, but someone's hosting a night, a town board meeting on April 25th where they're discussing coyotes. That's literally all it says.
Discussing coyotes?
Coyotes? All right.
Please advise residents interest. It's kind of funny. It says, please advise residents interested in coyotes that they are invited to attend the town board meeting on April 25th, at which time coyotes will be discussed. So,
Coyotes exclusive, coy wolves as well?
I'm not quite sure.
And only rabid coyotes?
Only
or
rabbit.
all?
No, not even. We're not discriminating. What kind of coyotes? The meeting will last from 7 to 8 p.m. So it's a short meeting. Seems to be focused on coyotes, and it went out to all mayors and school superintendents in the town of Greenberg, April 25th. But okay, so that's that. Did I miss something? Go.
Did you? Is now a good time just to talk about our upcoming board election?
Yeah, we can, because I'm going to do highlights. I can do that next.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, go.
So I was going to announce that yesterday was the deadline to submit a petition if you wanted to have your name on the ballot to run for the Board of Ed, and I'm very excited to say that we have interest, and I think it's just wonderful when community members want to do public service. So we have 4 people running for the Board of Ed. We have Jody Meyer, who is running, Lauren Berman, Jeremy Arnon, and Nanisha Nunez. I hope I got everybody's name correctly. So they will be running. I expect, as in years past when we've had a contested election, our League of Women Voters has wonderfully held a candidates forum, so I'm hoping that will happen again. And I just want to put out a couple of ground rules, because in the past there have been some things that have happened not intentionally but that are not permitted by the rules, so I just wanted to review a couple quick things. This one is just for our board members, and I'm going to quote from a document put out by the New York School Board Association, and this has to go with school board members publicly endorsing other school board members. And what NYSBA says is that school board members have a right to express their own personal views on school district issues. However, school board members who wish to express their personal opinions about issues before the voters must clearly distinguish their personal views from those on the board. For example, when writing a letter to the editor of a newspaper in support of a voter proposition, school board members must be sure to explicitly state that the letter expresses their personal views. So let's all be aware of that. And I will add that NYSBA even discourages that on a personal level, because they say, if, say, a board member endorses somebody in a personal way and that person doesn't get elected, it could make for an uncomfortable situation as the board moves forward. I also wanted to say there's no campaigning on school property, and we are not allowed to post campaign materials on Metro North property. If there's anything else that comes up, I'll bring that up. But anyway, in the meantime, really the exciting news is that people are interested in public service, which is great.
Question, the thing about Metro North, is that a Metro North rule, or?
I believe it's a Metro North rule. Yeah, last year, that there were some posters put up. I'm not sure if it was necessarily even put up by the candidate, but it was brought to my attention, and I checked with Metro North, and it's not allowed. So.
And so they don't allow any kind of political?
I think that's right.
It's not specifically school board
No, I don't think
elections.
so. I only asked about school board, but yeah, we're not supposed to be posting campaign materials on Metro North property. That said, there's no problem with being in the train station and handing out materials. That's okay. Okay.
Got it.
Okay, so now we can go back to...
Okay, great. Thank you. So also just some highlights from the last several weeks between our last meeting and today. As you heard, our high school is presenting Into the Woods. It's happening this weekend, and it's a musical that intertwines the plots of several Brothers Grimm and Charles Perrault fairy tales. Everything from Little Red Riding Hood to Rapunzel and Cinderella. So definitely come out. I'm sure it's going to be amazing. I know Gerard has been working really hard with his team there, Laurie Walton and Steve and James. It's going to be great. The Marjo Foundation grant winners, David and Christian, found out this weekend that they are recipients of a grant of $5,000 for their research project, the use of advanced baited remote underwater video systems, otherwise known as BRUVS, to non-invasively characterize a potential nursery area for white shark in eastern Long Island, New York.
That is awesome.
It is quite awesome. This is the third straight year that our students have received the grant, so that's great. It kind of speaks
Seeing
to
nurses shark.
Yep.
Seeing sharks nurse.
the nurse.
Is very hard to do.
The white shark specifically.
Yeah, the great white. So
So it's pretty cool.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
Is that for research they do in the summer?
that is a great question, and one that I cannot answer
Okay,
for you.
sorry.
But that is my understanding that a lot of the research happens outside of the school year. Westchester Science and Engineering Fair. A bunch of our kids placed, and you did receive some information on this previously, but just to spotlight our kids. Hannah, who placed first in the neuroscience category. Emma, who placed second in engineering. Alex, who placed fourth in plant science. Maya, fourth in environmental science. Parker, in medicine and health, she placed fourth. Clara placed fourth in medicine and health. Ira placed, she won the excellence award in medical research, and Skylar won the Future of Medicine award. So pretty cool stuff. And we talked about honoring Lisa and I and Doug. I don't remember if Doug was there, but we talked about possibly honoring and recognizing some of our student scientists at an upcoming board meeting. Yes, sir.
Hey, Tony, can I throw one thing in
Yeah.
here? This science just made me remind me of it, which is that April 22nd at 2 p.m. in the OR room. Maybe you were going to say this already.
No, well-
Melissa Shandroff will be discussing the joys and challenges of teaching science in the 21st century as part of Dewey on Hudson speaker series. So,
Yes,
Ross
that's
and Josh spoke a few
Yes.
weeks ago.
Or
It was-
room in the
it was-
public library.
Yeah, the OR room in the public library. So that's April 22nd at 2 p.m. And you'll
This
get a
Sunday.
feel for where these students that win all these awards get their inspiration.
That's great. Thank you,
Yep.
Tim, for sharing that. April 22nd, right?
Yep.
Thank you.
Earth Day.
Earth Day is next Monday. High school national economics team places second at the New York State finals, so that's pretty awesome. So we have Elliot and Aaron and Tom representing Hastings-on-Hudson in 4 rounds that included tests on microeconomics, macroeconomics, international economics, and current events.
Is that a new team?
I was wondering, I think, was it last year? And Elliot, I think, got some amazing award last year?
I've never heard of us having an economics team.
I don't think it's the first year of the economics team. I don't know if this is the first year they placed where they placed. My understanding
We can
was...
ask Elliot when he comes.
Yes,
the
Elliot
next
is not
meeting.
here with us tonight, but we could certainly ask him. But very exciting that our kids were involved in this process.
State.
Yep, second in New York State. And our academic challenge team took first place in Division A at the Waco Quiz Bowl competition held at Byram Hills High School in Armonk.
Hopefully that's wacko.
Wacko, but I thought Wacko sounded worse than Waco. Wacko sounded like crazy. I don't know. Okay, but that's our group of kids who are
Fabulous.
they're great. Noah and Jacob and Joel and Nathan and Benjamin there. Also. We had our World Strides Onstage Heritage Festival Music Awards, right? So the HHA String Symphonia earned a gold rating and was named Outstanding Orchestra Group. The chorus earned a gold rating and a first place ranking at the concert choir category. The Pink Panthers earned a gold rating and an adjudicator award. The Madrigals mixed ensemble earned a gold rating and second place ranking in the chamber choir category. The jazz ensemble, Madrigals, tremble ensemble, and orchestra each earned gold ratings, and the band earned a silver rating. So 2 high school students were selected by adjudicators to receive Maestro Awards, Emma and Ruby, who are great. Both
What are the Pink Panthers? That's not.
I think it's our steel drumming band,
Oh.
That's, yeah, they have their t-shirts.
which is fabulous.
that they wear.
They are great.
Yeah. And in fact, when they play, a conga line tends to break out.
Yeah, people
My
get very
daughter was a
excited.
founding member.
And then just last but not least, our next board meeting is also a Tuesday. It's May 1st. It's 7:30.
Well, all I can say is, wow, go Hastings kids. That is really something. I don't even know where to start. And I will also say, our music department has been bringing home, they go every 2 years, and they
In Boston,
consistently
yeah.
bring home these awards. It's just so impressive, and it's a result of our kids, of our fabulous teachers, and the incredible amount of work they put in. I mean, those kids we've all been parents. They're here 7 in the morning, working with Mr. Riss and Mr. Jernigan, and then all these other, we have a lot to celebrate, and I think we
Absolutely,
have
me
to
too.
figure out a way to really honor
really
all this
amazing kids, too.
achievement.
All right, so my update and some of the highlights. We don't have a student here, so we will not have a student report. First, public, that's you.
Sure. Okay, so we'll move into public comment. If anybody has a comment, feel free to step up to the podium, and you don't have to give your address, just state if you're a resident of Hastings.
I don't give my address?
No,
or
just
You don't have to give your address.
okay.
No, we learned you didn't have to, and we
Mixing it
thought,
up, I
why
see.
should you have to?
So, good evening. My name is Jennifer Cunningham. I am a resident of Hastings on Hudson. And I apologize for being late to this discussion, but I felt compelled as a parent, self-appointed parent expert in reading difficulties, to talk about some of my concerns about the discussion around Hastings' plans to implement or potentially hire reading specialists. So in my other life, I'm an ICU physician. So I see when problems go undiagnosed for too long, they come and present in a critical fashion. So my role as a physician and as a parent is to learn as much as I can. So when my daughter was diagnosed with dyslexia in the 2nd grade, at my behest, I decided I wanted to learn everything I needed to know about it. I became her biggest advocate. I read everything. I went to conferences, national conferences. I've read numerous books. I've held activities and events here for SEPTA. I became a SEPTA board member. I just engulfed in it. And what I've learned over the years is that there's so much misinformation about reading disabilities. And there's 2 major things. I've basically become the de facto parent expert and a parent advisor to any of the parents in district that, hey, I have a problem with my child having difficulty with reading. Oh, go talk to Jen. And there's 2 things that have really struck me throughout this process. One, and I don't mean this unique to our district by any means. It's not a knock on Hastings. This is a national problem. But I've been struck at the just profound ignorance about how reading disabilities present and how they impact a child's learning. And this is most prominent among the parent population, even when your child is diagnosed, but it's really prominent among educators, teachers, and administrators. They don't know what they don't know. I think people think of reading disabilities as the child who is learning how to read. So you think of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd grader. And people get that. That's easy. It's when those children are able to compensate for their disability and get through it, they often get missed. And if it had not been for my diligence, my daughter would have been missed. She was reading above grade level, at grade level, because she could memorize every single word she ever came across. She couldn't decode anything. If you put together a made-up word in front of her in the 2nd grade, she couldn't read anything. But she could read a storybook, and only because she was reading so painfully slow and starting to act out, I was able to pick this up. The teachers thought I was crazy when I said there was a reading problem. And the problem is when that gets missed, first of all, we don't have good assessments. A DRA is a terrible way to assess a child's reading ability because it only really looks at your ability to decode. They're not teacher, and again, not a cut on our teachers, they don't know how to assess fluency. They don't know how to assess comprehension. They don't know how to assess retention. And the problem is when these disabilities and learning differences are missed in the first, second, third grade, and they often are, by the time you're hitting middle school, people aren't assessing reading. So the way it gets presented when these children have missed reading disabilities, later they just can't keep up with their work. They're the smart student who's just not keeping up, who isn't learning the content in social studies and science. Because how often do you have a child read out loud in the 6th grade? You don't, right? The way I explain it to people is you can get through and have basic competency, basic functional literacy. I think about I can read in Spanish. I'm not fluent in Spanish. I can get through text, but I can't learn about Golgi apparatus and mitochondria and different things that it comes to history. That's what happens when a child with an undiagnosed reading disability goes for years. And we know our reading instruction has been terrible. And it's not unique to Hastings. And I see that we're starting to address it, and that's great. But you have a whole bunch of kids who have been misdiagnosed, misunderstood. They're the kids that are smart but just didn't do so well on their ELA test. And maybe they get AIS, maybe they don't, because we don't really believe in the state test. The state tests are probably picking up kids that have reading disabilities. We're just missing it because the kid otherwise seems smart. That's what it is. When you have a normal to high intelligence kid who has a reading disability, it's going to present in atypical ways. It's going to be that kid that can read but isn't retaining, isn't learning things. And I think until we as a district, as educators, as administrators, as teachers have a higher sophistication and have it on our radar, we are going to continue to miss those kids. And we hopefully going forward, we will not see that the way we have in the past. But as a parent, as the parent expert, I have talked to too many parents of children who are diagnosed in middle school and high school, an 8th grader reading at a 3rd grade level, a 10th grader reading at a 4th grade level. Very often, these kids go to CSE and their reading's okay enough that they may not get reading services, but it's not strong enough that they can learn about the Golgi apparatus and the mitochondria, because it's like reading in a foreign language. It takes so long. So until we have a higher sophistication of what it means to have a reading disability, how are we assessing their fluency? How are we assessing their comprehension? I think there are a lot of kids that were underserved for years. And I understand that there's budgetary concerns. I think there's a lot more need at the middle school and high school than anyone realizes. And again, I don't mean that as a knock to the teachers and educators. You don't know what you don't know. They don't understand that these are kids that just can't retain things. That's a reading disability. And until you know that, you're going to continue to miss it. Oh, there's no problem. We don't have a need here. It's because you don't know what you're looking for. So I think if we're going to be budget conscious, and I understand that we have to, I think we need to have a plan in place, a robust plan in place to identify kids that have missed reading disabilities. There are a lot of them out there. And we need to make sure that for those kids that don't meet the criteria for CSE, that there are building level supports, both at the middle school and at the high school, so that we can address their reading deficiencies, so that they can go on to college, that they can go on to be successful without the kind of struggles that we've seen way too many kids face in this district. Thank you.
Jennifer, do you mind if I pick your brain for a minute? Sure. First of all, thank you. That's like really informative. And I would like, I think, to respond on where we are, in the budget about reading. I think that would be helpful. But a couple of things struck me when you're saying about it's a test I don't know, DRA that we're
direct. I forget the D stands for reading assessment. So we use Fontes and Pinnell. Right?
Benchmark assessment. Yep.
Right. So the way that they do it, they're just having kids read through a passage that's at various levels, and you can assess where they're at. You're supposed to accurately assess the number of, it's like the word count,
miscue,
the miscues, if you've misread read something, the fluency. The problem is the way that the fluency and comprehension is assessed is very poor. There's a lot of leeway, and that's where my daughter was missed, because she could get through every word of the paragraph, but there was no fluency there. And if the teachers don't understand that, they can often kind of oh, she's fine, she's reading through it. Well, how painful is that to read through an entire textbook? Think about the time you get to middle school and high school. You have to read through a textbook like that. You can't comprehend and can't keep up. You can keep up in second grade, third grade when you're talking about chapter books. But by the time you get to middle school and high school, forget it. That's where those kids are being left behind. And we've missed that for too long.
I guess what I'd like to do, and I know now is not the time for
Yeah.
this conversation, but because you do have this wealth of knowledge, and I've seen your research in other areas, and you are thorough, you are good. I'd love us to be able to draw from your wealth of knowledge, to talk to you about what are good assessments at different grade levels and all of that.
I know Laura has talked about that, but for example, when my daughter moved from here to Eagle Hill, she went from reading chapter books to reading like sentences. They brought her way back because she couldn't get through text in an adequate fashion. She's now reading at grade level, but that took 5 years to get her there. And so the way that they assess it, they use the GORT, which teaches people how to look at fluency, because you not have to just get through each word, you have to get through it with ease and rapidity. The way I can't read through Spanish, a child with a reading disability can't read until they've been fully remediated. So unless you're accurately assessing that, and I know that there's been some conversation about having more accurate assessments, but I think, again, back to the point of there are a lot of kids in the middle school and high school that are missed. And I think, even having my daughter's screening tests were ignored. We have the DIBELS, D-I-E...
Dibbles.
Dibbles. Some people say DIBELS, some
Yeah.
people Dibbles. But it's a way of looking at fluency and word count. They ignored it because even though her word count and word rate was much lower, because she was getting through it above grade level, they just passed over it. And that's what happens. And again, it's not a knock on our teachers, it's universal. So I think we need to have a plan in place to really accurately assess the kids that have been missed by kind of poor literacy education in the past.
And with that, do you want to address budget-wise about...
We could do it.
Oh, you want to do it during the budget
I mean, we
presentation?
Yeah, I just
Okay.
wanted to do it during the...
Sure.
No, yeah, and we're going to go over that in the budget in a couple of minutes, so just to...
All right, thank you, Jen. Any other public comment? Okay. Okay, next is our security audit update.
So, Dr. Moralia, this is Matt, and I think you met everyone, and some of our parents. So,
Just to go off track a little bit, Dr. Cunningham, my daughter was not diagnosed until 6th grade with dyslexia, and there were terrible issues all along, and it was heartbreaking because as a parent, it's heartbreaking to watch your child not understand she's reading sentences, but she doesn't gather what she's reading. But she now has an IEP, and she's going into high school next year because she got really good, a good reading specialist to work with her. She's on the right track. So I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Didn't mean to go off track. I'm here to talk about security. So thank you for having me tonight. I'm very appreciative to be here and to be a guest. I was at a board meeting last week, 2 weeks ago in Watertown, New York. Has anyone ever been to Watertown? It's way north, a larger school district. They have 8 public schools in their district. And I addressed the board similarly, and I said, we spend a lot of our efforts as community members and as board members holding the school accountable for curriculum and reading specialists and athletic programs and art programs. And I think I would pose the question to any parent listening or any parent that's thinking about their child, and we all know that our children are very precious to us and probably the most important thing to us. We spend a lot of time focusing on a lot of things, but if you were to ask a parent, would you rather your son score the winning touchdown or come home safe at the end of the day? You got to ask yourself, what do you think the answer is going to be? Would you rather your child get all A's and score extremely high on their SATs and get into Yale, or come home safe at the end of the day? I think we step back and we realize that the things that we hold the school accountable for as a board and as a community, we need to include the safety and the welfare of our students, because that is really the centerpiece for everything we're about, is protecting our children. So I'm a father of 3 children, so I speak to you tonight as a father who, like millions of Americans, drop their kids to school every day expecting my innocent children to be delivered back to me safely. And we have a a struggle that we face because every time there is a high-profile incident like what occurred in Florida back in February, it starts to raise the attention back onto school violence and gun safety and security, and debates begin to rise up, and then people sometimes overreact, or some people will run the opposite way because they maybe don't want to react, and there's a lot of different feelings and debates around this topic. So when I speak to you tonight, I can say I speak as a father of 3 children. I also consult schools in about 30 states around our country. I was in Florida all last week working with schools. I work with schools all around Westchester County. And there's a lot of similarities in schools. So one of the things that the Hastings School District has done is they've really addressed this issue, and they hired our firm recently to come in and do what's called a security risk survey of your school. And what that is it's an assessment of your buildings, your grounds, your security protocols, your procedures, your capabilities, and your emergency readiness. And we put a report together for you, and we come up with recommendations. Before I go there, I want to read something to you real quick. This came from a seminar I was recently at. It's Burgess versus the Broward County Public Schools, and that is the school where the school shooting occurred back in February. And the recent mass shooting at the Broward County Public Schools in Broward County, Florida, has resulted in a series of notices of claim being filed against the school district. Now, let me stop right there because I want to preface this by saying we're not going to focus on, the liability and the liability that's on a school or a school district. That is not our main focus. Our main focus is we want our kids safe. But I want to go through this because at the end they make recommendations on how to not only reduce violence and safeguard children and faculty, but how to keep these things from happening. So this talks about the first notice of claim was filed by Anthony Borges, a 15-year-old student who was shot twice in the torso and 3 times in the legs while trying to lock a door to protect himself and other students. He then helped save his own life by using the knowledge that he learned in Boy Scouts to create a tourniquet to slow the bleeding to his wounds. Now, the theory of the notice of claim against the school district is premised upon the idea that the school system, which stands in the shoes of the parents while the children are within the custody, failed in its duty of reasonable care. The notice of claim alleges that the school failed to adequately protect the students from life-threatening harm and that their actions were unreasonable, callous, and negligent in light of what they knew. So this goes on. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but at the end they have recommendations that the legal counsel is making to school districts. And this is in New York State, by the way. This is a law firm out of Syracuse, New York. It's the law firm of Frank Miller. He's very well known in risk management around New York State. These are recommendations for prevention. Security review of building procedures by professionals. Update district security procedures, building access, security at doors, various other security measures to harden the perimeter, active shooter training, the utilization of closed-circuit cameras, hiring of school resource officers, internal school security communication systems, and review of lockdown and lockout procedures. I took a look at these recommendations, ironically, and I compared it to the recommendations in the report that we wrote for your district. And you are basically in line with everything that's occurring here. In fact, I would go one step further and say we've even gone as far as to include our aides and our monitors and our paraprofessionals, our athletic coaches, in our safety preparedness planning here in Hastings. I want to say that when the issues come up and the differing viewpoints, I hear the same discussions I hear in California, that I hear in Texas, that I hear in Florida, that I hear in North Carolina, that I hear in New York. We don't want to create correctional facilities. These aren't prisons, these are schools. We want to be a welcoming environment. This is a place of education. We're educators, we're not emergency managers. And I hear a lot of this all the time, but I would venture to say this, that by state law, the school is responsible like a parent for a child that is in their custody. Therefore, the number one priority of the school is to keep that child safe. So the question that I'm going to pose to the board tonight, and I'm going to open this up for discussion, is where do you feel we are here in Hastings as far as safeguarding our buildings and our students? And where is the discussion? And can we have an open dialogue tonight to discuss these issues now that it's been a few weeks since the trauma of this incident, which it's still etched in our memory and it'll never leave, but we're just not going to put a Band-Aid on something, or we're not going to have a knee-jerk reaction. Now that we've had time for this to digest, I would like to discuss this tonight. I believe Maureen has sent out some of our findings and recommendations.
Excuse me, is that this?
That is, well, is that?
Which year?
That was like 4 years ago.
No,
not
that's-
the new one, and I just said to you walking down, I think I sent it to the principal, not.
This isn't, I'm looking through my stuff, this
Okay.
is the only thing I
It's-
have.
We just,
Clearly, I collect.
Yeah, so let me,
It's not going to be in our public documents because it's an internal document.
so let me go through this. I'm gonna read some of the recommendations while Maureen is forwarding the report to
Because
you.
there's some things that have to do with our internal safety protocols, so I'm going to forward it all to you. I just got the
Can I
final
ask-
version from
Can I
Matt.
ask
Yes.
Can I ask one question, though?
Yes, sir.
Can we receive your recommendations, and then we as a board discuss, rather than
Have
sort of open
discussion
up
here
now, live ad hoc?
That is, well, that's
Yes.
on the table now, so let's I guess, discuss that. It's up to the board president and the board, I guess. The idea of this discussion was to show you what the Hastings School District is doing, and I can say this, that you're heading in the right direction. I will say that. I want the parents to feel comfortable, and I understand your concern. That's why we're not going to share all portions of the report. But we did want to discuss some of the issues that might incur some money to the district to make some security implementations. So,
Well, 100%, which I guess what I'm saying is I'd like you to lay those things out,
And then we'll,
and I'd like to receive the report, and then sort of write down the things that'll cost money and process it.
Yeah.
And then,
I appreciate that. So where would you like to take this conversation where we are now?
You want to start with the high school and share like a
I
couple of
can,
recommendations?
I can share some of the things that were key points to the high school. We'll do middle school, and then we'll do Hillside School. So high school, we want to,
I didn't get it.
Oh,
am I in it?
You just
Okay.
got it late.
Okay, sorry.
so recommendations, one was having a standardized policy where selected school employees can be specially trained to assess threatening behaviors made by students. So one of the issues that we have in schools is we could have students possibly indicating violence, but the school has no standardized way to assess it and decide whether or not it's a viable threat or if this person is a danger to themselves or the school community. So one of the things that we're going to be doing here in Hastings on April 27th, actually, is we're going to be training administrators and your mental health professionals on how to assess student behaviors that could be indicators to show higher risk level for violence. That's one of the things.
wouldn't
Sorry,
that be the
Matt?
job of the school psychologist?
I was just going to
Yeah,
say the
so-
same thing, that wouldn't they have that?
No, and this is, I'm glad you brought this up because I deal with this on a regular basis. School psychologists are not trained. They are not trained to assess violence. They are school psychologists, which is educationally driven, and they are not violence prevention specialists. So what we like to do with the school psychologists is try to include your mental health professionals in our training, so, because they can have conversations with other mental health professionals, and there's HIPAA laws that protect privacy and things. So it's important, but it's a misconception that the school psychologist is the threat assessment expert. They're actually not. They know nothing about it, typically speaking, unless they've been specially trained.
Although the guidance counselors are, we used to think of them as college counselors, but there's so much more now.
Yeah,
Are you saying
They're
that
all
you don't-
being trained now.
They're
you don't think that they
all
should
being
go into it?
trained.
No, but they actually were, I just, not to just jump in,
Yeah.
but when this is something that a lot of schools are doing, because to Matt, it is a
specialty training, and I will tell you that when, I don't know if this is on, but when we opened it up to the administrators and in speaking about this type of training, our guidance, our school psychologists, everyone jumped on it, like they all want, and actually, it'll probably go out to teachers and be opened up, but we're doing 2 cohorts the first time, Matt. We have 2, I had to arrange a scheduling, but again, this is something that, when we offered it, people were, we instant, like, all over it, so and our social workers as well.
Yeah,
And the principals and assistant, like, there's so many people that we had to, like, open up another session of it. So this is very, and I think it's just like police officers, they receive specialized training in different areas like this as well, so.
Yes, so it's a specialized training, and you're speaking of the New York State School Board Association. I've actually been retained for May 27th. You'll be getting a notice on shortly. I'll be doing a live stream training statewide to every school board in the state of New York on this topic. So I just wanted to make you aware of that.
Does this come with some sort of certification? What is it connected to?
Yeah, it's connected to it's a train the trainer certification for schools.
So it's called Train the Trainer.
Yes, and it's been put together by myself, who I've done academic research in this area, my partner, who is retired from the U.S. Secret Service and served on the Safe School Initiative study that published the first document on school violence. So we train schools around the country on this, and it's, I mean, I hate to say it, but I only wish the school in Florida had this training. They could have probably prevented this well in advance, because the shooter in that case, they had plenty of time to intervene, and they did not. And that's also one of the issues that there's notices of claims for. So I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole on this, but just know that I'm very happy that Hastings has decided to take this on, and it's going statewide on May 22nd for every school board in the state of New York. Some of the other issues that we had concern about had to do with the access control. So I'm going to talk about this building in particular, the main entrance to the high school and also the entrance to the Farragut School. We've recommended that the Farragut School entrance be moved to the side. There's already a ramp there for anyone that needs wheelchair accessibility. There is a corridor already somewhat constructed with 2 sets of doors. Best practices with access control into schools is to buzz people into what we call a vestibule area that's secure, so they can be properly screened before they gain entrance into the school building where the students are. So what we'd like to do here at the middle school is there's an office that's not used. We would like to turn that into a security office, and we're going to do some slight construction, and we would like to have a visitor monitoring system in place, a visitor management system. And all persons coming to the school, they're going to need to be vetted when they come to the facility. So you can be assured that we're not just going to allow anyone to walk into your school building not vetted anymore, not screened. So we're going to be working at possibly moving that to what we call the BOCES entrance. We view that's a very viable area to have a secure vestibule where people can be properly screened. We think the one at the high school is already in a good location. We're going to enhance the area, like recommended by the law firm, with some more closed-circuit television, and we're going to have a double set of secured doors. What we don't want is right now at the middle school, and here's the vulnerability. The security officer is seated in the hallway up a stairwell. And what happens is if somebody's buzzed in or propped the door open, they can just walk and have access to the school. You're on the honor system. And I go into a lot of schools where, there's a sign that says, please report to the main office. Well, obviously, if you don't have good intentions, you're going to disobey that sign. So what we want to do is we want to create a system in all your schools. At Hillside, we're also going to be moving the security officer, instead of being all the way inside the school, we're recommending that the security officer, there's like a copy machine if you've been up the Hillside inside the main office. We would like to construct a wall there with a counter and your visitor management system, so people could be screened before they get into the building. So what we want to do is we just want to have a screening process, so not anyone can just walk into the school unchallenged and walk around the hallways where your children are. So we're trying to do our due diligence in that regard.
Matt,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt you. I know you used the word vetting. How do we know what to vet? I mean, I could be dangerous and show you my driver's license. I have no arrests. I have no anything that would trigger anything. So how do we intelligently vet?
Yeah, so case in point, going back to this case, one of the notices of claim have to do with the student in question that committed the assault. actually committed crimes on school property that was not prosecuted by the school or the police. Therefore, he walked into a gun store without a criminal record and was able to buy a rifle because he did not have a criminal record because they failed to prosecute. Same thing. There's going to be loopholes or fault lines in our system. What we're hoping that's going to happen here is the visitor management system can be set up in a certain way where somebody shows an identification, and it will do a quick check to make sure that they're not like a sex offender or they're, have a custodial warrant or something in place. So the system is set up. Everything is streamed in, so it's almost instantaneously. Now, if we have an incident where somebody does not have a criminal record for some reason, or they obviously, people have free will if they have bad intentions and they're coming to the school. I spoke with Tony earlier about deliveries and things. People shouldn't just be allowed to walk around your schools with your children if they're not here on official business. So we're hoping the vetting system, one of the things we're going to be doing is working with your security officers, and there's going to be policies and procedures about, deliveries, and people coming to the school need to have appointments and they need to be here on official business. They just can't show up just to wander through the school. And it may be a little bit of a change from the old culture, but it's a responsible change. So when we say vetting, it's a screening, more of a screening through a computer system that's going to at least indicate to the security officer that person maybe has something wrong. Of course, if they don't have a criminal record or anything and they're here on official business and then they decide to not do their official business and do something else, it's very difficult to defend against that.
But other than that, it sounds like if you have a prior approved reason to be here, then you're in, and if not, then you may not be in.
Yeah, so that is what the discussion is about, and it makes sense.
And that was like an easy, in terms of letting the security guards know who's supposed to be in the building, that's easy enough.
And in that software, each building has the ability to send who is coming to see you that day. So, that helps them do their jobs, and it's sent out to all the guards, so if they come in the opposite door.
Right.
But then, it doesn't mean if someone doesn't have an appointment, they could, like they do now, they call and say so-and-so. So it's not as though it can't help, but it'll actually help streamline their job. So as an example, they said if you have an event at Hillside, like at a school, you can then preload like all the parents that are coming in, so it helps expedite the process of them coming in. So like events like that, that's how we would handle that, because other schools do it that way. So if they understand that, you may have a lot of people coming through, so you don't want to hold up the door.
Right. It's a place of business. It's a place of education. So you think of your office environment. People are typically, they don't just show up at an office environment without an appointment. So the same thing should apply to a school. It doesn't make sense to let anyone off the street into the school. If anyone feels otherwise, that's their right to feel that way, but as a security professional, I would highly recommend against an open policy. Open policy are not safe policies. Now, that is why we're addressing two different issues here. One is we're addressing what's called the internal threat. So Dr. Cunningham she talked about her daughter having dyslexia, and it was undiagnosed, and then it came out in other ways. Well, there's also behavioral issues that'll happen when somebody's on a pathway to violence that, if assessed properly, it can be intervened on. So we're addressing both the internal threat and also the external threat of somebody coming in off the street. Another area of recommendation is going to be more training, not just in threat assessment, but on how to respond initially to natural disasters. I don't know about you, but I flew into Westchester County Airport last night. It was horrifying. It was the wind was terrible. The weather. My son has a baseball game tomorrow. It's supposed to be 45 degrees. I think we're all. Something weird is going on with our weather patterns, with climate change. We're seeing tornadoes, we're seeing severe wind, so we need to practice drills. So we've been practicing these drills at your schools, sheltering drills for severe weather. These are all things that you may not think of, but if a severe weather emergency occurs and a piece of glass flies through a classroom window and takes out a child's eye, we would wonder why we as a school board did not ever practice a sheltering drill for severe weather. So we do those drills now. We're going to be training your aides and your monitors on how to manage recess, how to look for suspicious activity in and around the school. Everything we're looking to do here is really the children The children see no difference. It's part of, it becomes, they're in their safe space, so what we like to call schools the safe space. They see very little change. The change is going to be with the faculty and the administrators making sure that these things are done properly. So,
Can I just ask a clarifying question, if you don't mind? And I appreciate that it's an analogy, and it's probably meant in the best way, but I'm not sure how the internal threat is connected to a comment made by a member of the public.
a comment made by the member of the public?
Yeah, I'm not sure. So earlier you said that if assessed properly, and then you made a connection to Dr. Cunningham's statement. If you
Yeah,
could
so
please
the
clarify.
analogy, let me clarify. So Dr. Cunningham did her research in about being dyslexia. I've done my research as a doctor in security.
Okay.
So when it comes to threat assessment, the analogy, there were indicators that were showing that she's saying school teachers were not trained to recognize, and therefore her daughter went through the system and then found out later on when it was properly assessed. The same thing applies to security. The school psychologists, the counselors, the teachers, they do not know which indicators to look for if a student is traveling down the pathway to violence and could possibly become a school attacker. That was what the analogy, it's absolutely related, but they're different topics.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So, moving along, we're one of the big changes. I'm going to recommend, and it is a cost, but I would assure you, in my professional opinion, it is a valid cost, is to see if the village will provide you with a dedicated police officer who is going to be assigned to your school. And the police officer is a resource officer, and the word school resource officer is just what it's meant to be. They're not here to spy on your children. They're not here to, make sure the kids are well disciplined. The school resource officer is a resource to the teachers and the administrators for safety. And the school resource officer is to have a good relationship and a camaraderie with the children, a trusting relationship. Case in point, my brother is a assistant principal at a charter middle school in Central Florida. Last January, on a Wednesday evening, the school resource officer received a call on her cell phone from a student saying that he heard that there were 2 kids that were planning to attack the school on Friday. Of course, they had a good relationship with the school resource officer. She immediately notified the administration and her superiors. They ended up going to this boy's house, and they discovered in his bedroom he had a gun and about 100 rounds of ammunition and a hit list, and he wrote a suicide note, and he was absolutely planning an attack at that school on Friday. And if it wasn't for the relationship that the school resource officer that she had with those students, they would have never called her off duty on her cell phone to report what they overheard. So this is just one example of a school resource officer being here as a resource. They're here at your athletic events. We would like to see him or her be stationed if the kids are outside at recess or over at Reynolds Field. They can maybe be present. It's a deterrent. It's a good thing, but it is a cost. And this is something where I put in my report, I think the district should consider a full-time school resource officer. They don't have to be assigned. They could go between the schools. But I don't think they should just be a police officer that's on patrol, because what happens is the police officer will be here, maybe they're going to be out at recess with the children, and then there's a car accident and they get dispatched away from the school. I think if you really want the person here to protect your children, to be present, then we need to make sure that they're here. Case in point, not to keep using the active shooter, but we've had 2 incidents, one most recent in Maryland, where a school shooter came in and both incidents were stopped by the school resource officer who happened to be there at the time. So I hear the argument all the time, or the discussion, well, just because there's a police officer doesn't mean it's going to stop every incident. Absolutely not. All we can do is reduce risk. And by adding a school resource officer to your school environment, they become not only a deterrent, but they're also a resource, and they're a valuable resource that could actually confront a violent assailant or someone that did want to carry out violence against the students. So one of the recommendations you're going to see is for a school resource officer, and I hope you will consider that. All the other recommendations that were mentioned in the report, you're on track to do. I know Maureen has already been in contact with the security company to install more cameras. There's already been a visitor management system ordered. We've already done the risk analysis. We've already updated your protocol. I believe Hillside had a lockdown drill, I think today. Was it today or yesterday? Actually, Amy invited me for May 14th. They're having an evacuation drill. These are all good things. I want to put this on the record. There's a misconception that practicing drills will traumatize our students, and all the academic research in the psychology and mental health field is just the opposite. Practicing drills actually makes kids feel more comfortable and safer. So there's a misconception out there that by having drills we're traumatizing students, but you can go to any of your credible, peer-reviewed academic journals and you can search practicing security drills lessens anxiety. So I just wanted to put that on the record because I hear it all the time. Well, we don't want to traumatize our kids, or we're going to teach them to do bad things if we drill, and it is just the opposite. So I've spoken a lot. I don't want to take up all your time. I want you to know this, and I really mean this from the bottom of my heart. I love what I do, and I take it personal. I feel like I'm helping protect my own children in every district I consult. I really feel that way. So I hope you will take what I've said tonight and just consider it. You know, obviously you make decisions for your district, but I'm really thinking about what's in your best interest, and we're trying to balance things out here. Unfortunately, we're not living in 1953. We are living in different times with different challenges, and I think we just need to be progressive and move with those challenges. So I would open it up for any questions or comments at this time.
So the school resource officer, we have had
We've had that.
police in the building over different periods of time who come in and they walk in the building and we've had PAL programs, kind of not athletically, but, you know, where the police will come in, they used to take out groups of students, you know, 10 kids at a time to have dinner or whatever, and they would get to know the high schoolers. And that was something that was, you know, that the police department did. There was, you know, it was great. This sounds
like a youth officer. It was called a youth
yeah.
officer.
And we still have the PAL office.
Yeah, they're still
now. I think
kind of
3 days
I don't
a
think
week.
it's quite as much as it used to be, but anyway.
It used to be more full-time.
Yeah. Anyway, but I think, you know, there are two things. One, we do have the guys who were at the desks, and I think they do. I mean, I saw kids today talking to the middle school, you know, security guard, you know. They do get to know them a little bit. How important is it to make that person a full-time, especially if they're going through all the buildings, like vis-a-vis or versus having the guys at the desk at the door that come in and see the kids in and out all the time?
So it's about relationships. I referenced my brother's middle school it's at the Villages Middle School in Seminole County, Florida. I can tell you, having the right officer, he or she that forms good relationships with the students and faculty is an excellent resource, but it needs to be full-time, meaning having part-time, you're limiting the contact and the relationship they can form and build. And, you know, the program you mentioned is excellent. I wouldn't do away with the PAL program. I wouldn't do away with the dinners with the police. I would encourage that. But I think it's important that districts have a really good school resource officer. You're a small district. I think one would be sufficient, and that can interact with the faculty and the students and be present on a full-time basis. So if you're asking part-time, full-time, what I would recommend, they have an office in this building and an office at Hillside, and they could go between. They could spend time at Hillside some of the day, maybe come down here. The areas where students are going to be most vulnerable when they're out and about and they're running around or they're at Reynolds Field, maybe if there's an event, they can be there. So by having someone full-time, you can manage that better.
But it would be in addition to the security.
In addition to the security.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is an active policeman?
Yeah, there's going to be an active policeman. They go through 40 hours of specialized training up in Albany through the Department of Criminal Justice Services, and they get what's called School Resource Officer Certified. They are uniformed. They don't have to be, but they normally are. And you'll find that the officers, I've gone through the training. I did retire. I'm a retired police officer. I was a detective. But I can say this, the training is excellent, and it's, I assure you, they're not here to like track down the kids and make arrests. That's totally opposite of what they're doing. They're here as a resource, and they're also here as a peace officer that has the capability to protect people from danger, such as an armed threat. Unfortunately, an unarmed security officer doesn't have much of a chance against somebody with a weapon, whereas a school resource officer will at least have a chance to protect your children because they can meet that person with force if need be.
Are most of the, what are these called? I'm sorry, the resource officers, are they retired police officers?
No, they're not.
Usually currently in the district.
They're current officers that are selected, and I discussed this with Maureen and Tony. I don't even think it would be a bad idea to get together with the local police chief and be part of who they choose, because it's important to have the right officer. So you need someone that has good communication skills. They're going to treat people fairly. They're going to be kind. You don't want like officer, so-and-so that wants to give everybody a ticket. They don't belong in the school. But they're full-time police officers, but their job when they come to work every day is they come to the schools, and they're in the schools. They don't leave the schools and go to car accidents or domestics. So
then they're not part of the police union in town?
They are.
They are?
They are.
Okay. Oh, that's what I'm asking.
Yes, they are full-time, they would be a full-time Hastings-on-Hudson police officer that is assigned full-time to the school.
So if you were going to describe, I don't know, in your words, the top, call it 3 or 4 benefits that the district receives by having a full-time officer associated with 3 separate facilities, an elementary school, a middle school, and high school, what, in your words, are the top 3 or 4 tangible benefits?
You just want one word?
No, I want 3 or 4.
No, I'm saying one word answers.
You can answer however you want. I just want to...
Relationship, resource, capability to defend.
Elaborate on what you mean by relationship.
Forming personal relationships appropriately, so students trust him or her, faculty trust him or her, students would be willing to come to him or her if there was a concern, a question, they felt anxious, they needed help, that kind of relationship.
Right.
Used to be like that with Bloomer.
Matt, question for you.
Yes.
I know there are many members in our community who are very concerned about the idea of guns in school. Now, I know we currently have guns in school because we have our police officers through our PAL program. One question that has come to me, and you don't have to give me a complex answer, is it possible for a school resource officer, rather than using a gun with bullets, to use a stun gun or a teaser?
Yeah, so...
Or something non-lethal?
The answer is going to be no, and let me qualify why. The only time a police officer is supposed to use deadly force is to protect people from the threat of deadly force. So if they're not armed with a weapon capable of inflicting deadly force upon a threat, then they're not going to be effective. So a police officer, that's why they carry a sidearm. They carry a weapon so they can defend against deadly force.
How are the school resource officers budgeted? Does the budget come in towns you've worked in? Is it all school district? Is it half and half? Is it shared?
I've seen both. I've seen shared. I've seen both. That's a discussion that this group might want to have with the macro group of the village. I'm adamant about it because I think it's, a resource that you may never ever need, but then if you never need it, you don't know what you don't know. I mean, I hate to use Dr. Cunningham's, but you don't know what you don't know. Maybe that school resource officer will prevent something that we never knew would have happened because he or she was here.
I was just mentioning to Matt before that I was at a meeting, and actually in Harrison, the PTSA is paying for the police officers for the elementary schools in
I live in Harrison. They have
I'm
police
just
in
saying,
every
so
school
they raise
there.
that much money, so because the schools already employs 4 for their middle school and high school.
Yeah.
They already have 4 full-time.
They're
school
adding
resource,
3 more.
And they're adding 3 more, but because of their budget, because with their tax cap, the PTSA actually raised the money, and they're paying the village to...
$200,000.
No, I mean, so it's done very differently. There's PTSAs who pay for it throughout Westchester directly to the villages. There's schools that have it in their budget, and there's villages that pay for it.
One of the things I did not touch, which is I kind of knew the question because there's 2 different campuses. We did also make a recommendation for consideration that possibly the Hillside School we would add a security officer that would be at almost like a booth at the front entrance. So because the school is kind of in a neighborhood, more secluded, and it's away from everything, we thought maybe having that extra screening where it's a deterrent for people coming onto the property. Now, we all know people could walk onto the property if they're really adamant about it, but we would have one officer that works in the school and one officer that is at a booth where vehicles are not just going to be able to just freely drive up there and just go onto campus while the children are outside. So that was something where we wanted to focus as well. Again, these are costs, but I think they're good costs. Ask that question about safety, and what we're recommending here is reasonable. It's just a matter of making the decision to do these things, really.
So I think we need to get some time to look over the report and talk about it. And
if necessary, because we had this conversation, if there are very specific things that we want to talk about that are not things that we should talk about publicly, just because of the
Right.
nature of the content, we could invite Matt back to join for an
exec session. Okay.
Or a small group. We talked about that, right?
Right.
Like if not everyone's interested, not interested, I know everyone's interested, but if not everyone's available
Right.
for a conversation or wants to join, it would be different. So,
Yeah, and just to clarify, just for the public, our concern obviously is not letting our weak spots be known publicly, so that's the reason for all the, all the sidestepping.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
all right. So we're good. You know where to go.
Yeah, you don't have to stay.
He knows this building.
but you know
It's here
what?
all the
Yeah,
time.
right,
Better
you know
not
it very
go.
well. Okay, so with that, I think, Tony, do you want to give us an update
Yes.
on the search for the Director of Leading Instruction and Administration?
Great. Yeah, thank you. So thank you again, Matt, for joining us tonight and for the update. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So just so the board knows, we had over 20 candidates screened for the position. 7 were invited back for a small committee interview with our building leadership team and Director of Special Ed. Great conversations, really, strong candidate pool that we're excited about. And 3 of those candidates are being invited back for a larger committee interview next week. And so we have candidates who have building leadership experience, district leadership experience, without getting into the particulars of their names for just the purposes of confidentiality for them, as they may or may not have informed their districts that they're in this process. But we have people who, one candidate has been a director of learning in another district, and people who have experience at the high school level and at the elementary level. So it's a nice cross-section of candidates with good background. Our leadership team felt really positively about all 3 candidates. Everyone has different things that they're looking at and might feel stronger about one in this area or another about in this area. And they will be meeting with a committee of people next Wednesday, I think. So, and then we'll go from there.
Question about the committee.
Yes.
Who's on the committee?
It's parents, teachers, some administrators, and students.
Okay, and is it PTSA SEPTA parents?
Yes, that's,
Okay.
that's what was reached out to.
Great,
I
great.
think that's what was reached out to, yes. Okay.
And, sorry, what is the date of the interview?
I think it's next Wednesday, the 25th.
Okay,
Yes.
cool. Okay, great.
And then next up, sorry.
Okay.
so the hope would be this person would start like in July.
July 1st, yes, yeah, to give them, yeah.
Okay, any questions?
No, it's good.
Okay, next is the adoption of the 2018-19 school budget.
So let me just plug this back in, sorry. So what we want to do is just share a quick update and show everyone some of the key information. So just a condensed version of all the information. But this,
And there's the detailed slides.
is later on. Janine, this was attached to the
It's attached to the
agenda, and it's online, right? It's already posted on our website. So just 1 second.
And once the board adopts the budget tonight, we'll have the budget books available. We put them in local, like the library, and online, and
Okay.
Village Hall.
And so this is probably the most important slide for people to be aware of, because this is the budget that's being recommended for adoption tonight. This captures the numbers, right? 3 numbers that I think are important for our community to be aware of is that initial one up at the top. How much of a budget change? It's 4.26% of a budget change. Down near the bottom, you'll see the proposed tax change, and that is 5.54, so that's of the tax levy, how much we went up.
Well, that's the levy change, not the
Levy
tax.
change, sorry. Yes, I always get that wrong. And then down at the bottom, the last number you'll see is 0.97. That is the tax rate, and that has a direct impact on taxes that people pay in the community. So,
Just a quick question.
yeah.
Maureen, why
Yes.
is that one 5272 and this one's 5518?
At the top, you're saying?
5272.
Versus.
Oh, yeah, it should have, I'm sorry, that was a typo. It is 50, it should be 50 with the 518.
The bottom numbers are
Yeah,
right.
586.
5518. That one's wrong, this one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry.
This one's right.
The
These
one
are-
on the bottom is
yeah.
right, yes.
And so the same with the last number, the two.
Just
yeah.
for, and just to make sure everything's the same.
Yes, yep.
This one says 5453.
50, okay, it picked up the wrong one, okay.
Yeah, so I just think there's some.
Thank you. So that information is important for the community to have, the budget change, the tax rate also being incredibly important. So moving along so that you can see some information there that, not going to go through everything as it relates to the tax levy, but one thing that we think is important for the community to note is because we had a significant growth factor this year, we could have went even higher with the tax levy without piercing the cap. And so there is, down at the bottom, you'll see a number, $288,955. That's how much money has not been levied for next year. So it's kind of being left on the table, if you will. In terms of proposals for what is being added, and you'll see staff slides with multiple different pieces. So some of the additions, and these are things that we've talked about consistently, and you'll see multiple slides, right? So something you may not see here, you'll see later on. Literacy specialist, the math coach, some PD training with Jim Wright, ruler training. We have the PBIS. We have the Community Service Club, the Next Gen Science Standards. We have Middle School Science Fair, PD for the People of Color National Convention, some calculators for the math class. That's not for everyone. That's just covering a small amount. Additional PE staffing, some security personnel, which we kind of left more broadly, right? We didn't get into the specifics of that, so we can unpack that. There is a resource room teacher for Hillside. There is a secondary literacy support additional to the one that you saw on the first slide. There is the guidance counselor being increased to by 0.8 at Hillside. There is also the
Increase 2.8 or by 0.8?
by 0.8.
By
They are
0.8.
0.2.
Being increased to
It becomes a
5.8.
right. Sorry, 0.2, but yeah. In terms, and you'll see, by the way, and I apologize for not just next. You'll see what area it's in, right? Hillside, FMS, HHS. You'll see those things there, or special ed. We talked about increasing the existing district psychologist, who is at a 0.8, up by 0.2, which makes the person a 1.0. And any position, what has been done in the past, any position that went from like whatever, 0.2, 0.7, to a full-time position is a position that people must reapply for. And so this is not assigned to a person, but it is a full-time position. We also have a psychologist there, and we, as you will vote on shortly to accept, there is a psychologist retiring. So it's not an added thing to the budget, but we actually will be looking for 3 psychologists in this process.
And so, Tony, where you're going from something that's like a 0.7 or a 0.8 up to full-time, I'm assuming that someone who's 0.7, 0.8 is already getting benefits, right?
Yes.
So you're,
Yeah.
so it's not adding that
Salary.
No, it's just,
It's just
and
that
it's at a 0.2, you're talking about like $20,000, like, yeah, and all relative, right, depending on how much where they come in stepwise, right? We talked about adding a bus at Hillside, and that would be with a monitor. Again, the FTE there is not as relevant. So some highlights that we think are important for people to know. We anticipate about $111,000 increase in state aid, which is a nice thing. It's not like a huge number, but it's a nice number to have. Transfer about $2.1 million of appropriated fund balance to revenue. We want to transfer about $750,000 to retirement reserve to go to revenue. We want to transfer about $350,000 from tax tertiary reserve to revenue. We also want we will be decreasing miscellaneous receipts up to $178,000, so tuition to other districts, out of district placements, and BOCES classroom rental. we are recommending that we recover the space that is here in the middle school. That is now.
I just have a quick question. What is the retirement reserves full fund? How much is in the retirement reserve total? Yeah, you take the 750 out.
It would be like 700 left.
Okay,
Sorry.
But we're hoping to add money back out of this year's budget, right?
Yeah, right now it's 725. So if you take it out, yeah. Okay. All right.
So once we take out 750 out, it's zero.
No.
No.
There's still another 700.
Correct.
Right. Projecting. That's what the projection is. Sorry. And
We're allowed to keep it up to about 3 million in there under the law, like in terms of.
okay, it's a revenue summary. Again, I'm not going to take you through each of these things, but you'll see many of the things that we just talked about on the previous slide, right? Like state aid is up there, BOCES information is up there, admissions from, individuals, different pieces that lead to revenue. And you'll see, again, the total revenue listed at the bottom, what was adopted for this year and what is being proposed for next year. The fund balance at June 2018, and this is an important one to show just to see how the fund balance progresses. So where it was at the end of 2016, where it was at the end of 2017, and where we will end up being at the end of this school year. So you can kind of see the progression, and like the tax area was at 2.7 2 years ago. It's going to be at 1 million at the end of this year. And for example, the retirement system went from 1.5, almost 1.6 to 1 million. So some of the shifts, and that has been, if I'm correct understanding, to balance.
Yeah, and we actually did settle a bunch of tax services
right,
as well.
we did pay out that, right. So that is information that is important, so you can see the progression of those funds. We are also recommending that the board votes on creating a capital reserve fund or shifting them.
It exists, we're just, that's why it has the date of May 17th and 2011, because it exists, we're just modifying
Making a
its
change,
limit,
sorry.
ability to put additional funds in it.
And that has to be on the vote. That has to be on the May 15th
So what did
vote.
we do before 2011? We never used a reserve fund?
We never had one.
It hadn't been created yet.
Correct.
Okay.
So this is a separate thing that people vote for on the
Yes.
ballot from the school
It'll be a separate
budget.
proposition. But you have to vote yes to put it on the ballot.
We have to
And
make
so-
sure we really explain that well to people.
In a budget newsletter, I think we'll put,
Put the resolution in there.
right, and we explain, we have language from the first time we did it, I think.
So that proposition looks like it's doing two things. It's increasing what the total can be, and then it's also authorizing an actual transfer of the $275,000.
Right, so there's two things. That's a cleaning up of the last bond to take any money left from like the old debt service and just dump it in there, which you have to do something with that money anyway. But then in addition, we want to start being able to put money into that reserve again, because as we're looking at potentially doing a bond, it's going to be important to have like the startup money in there, because you do start incurring costs right away before you issue a bond.
Maureen, what is the current limit on it? What are we at?
2
What do we
million.
want to change it to?
2, and we're going to go to 5.
Okay. And that will ease our work with the bond that we're working towards.
Yes.
Now, again, 5, a lot of times people just put a high number. I don't know whether we would ever get to the 5, I think, but the...
It just allows...
Correct. And a lot of districts will just set it at 10, even if they know, just so that they have that flexibility that you don't, because it was at 2, if had it been at 5, we wouldn't have needed to do this. But I think it's good to, reset it.
This is the most important piece of information that we want people to know. May 15th is the budget vote and school board election vote. And it's a Tuesday, and it is a month from today. 4 weeks from today, sorry. All right.
Does anyone have any questions on the budget or on the referendum regarding the capital reserve?
So I know there are things that we're still talking about, right?
Yes.
We're talking about security, we're talking about special ed positions. So even with this budget and adopting this budget, it still allows us some flexibility to put other things in place that maybe we haven't
Yeah.
finalized now or move things, right?
Yeah, so in essence, all the board is doing tonight is adopting a number where we're going to land and where we're going to ask people to vote. And certainly there could be changes that arise even after the budget vote based on needs.
So just to jump on top of what Jody said, so by us, this is my first vote. So by us voting on this, as you just said, we're voting on what we're agreeing, where the money to be used, it's allocated and whatnot. But if as a board or as a district, we feel that there needs to be a change, and there's a consensus that there needs to be a change, whether it's in terms of PD, security, programming, or anything, we have that flexibility.
Yes.
I'll clarify that. My understanding under our policy is that the superintendent is authorized to move money from one line item to another if it's under 10,000.
That's correct.
Anything over 10,000 requires board approval.
Okay.
So there is a mechanism built in, and then there are some actual placeholders you put up there.
Yes.
So I think there was the one literacy specialist, and then a second, almost a holding for additional literacy support.
If I might, I think what's a pretty concrete example, I don't know if that's answering your question, but I see an additional bus at Hillside as a concrete example that we're intending to spend money there. If enrollment plays out a certain way, or busing routes play out a certain way, that money may not end up getting spent there, right? And not to say that we're pulling the bus, but the need may not present itself in the coming months. Because
Or it's like at the last minute, if we decide we need an extra kindergarten
Right,
class, we have to...
exactly.
We had to vote for
We
it.
have to vote for it.
Okay.
but we
Right,
can-
you would vote for it.
Yeah.
Right, but I'm
Right.
saying, even though we wrote it here, this bus may not be something that we end up needing.
Understood.
And during the course of the year, like Maureen brings to us whenever, we're transferring money from one
Okay.
line item to another in the budget.
Right, like I think we have two today, where
have
like
two
at the end
today.
of the year, if we
Right.
may have more money that hasn't been used up,
Yes.
and you may say, oh,
Yep.
gosh, our boiler is XYZ,
Exactly.
we can then look to change something
And then
like
Thank you
that.
for
even
that
in the worst case
clarification.
scenario, not that we, obviously, these are things within the spending plan we have, right? If we didn't have the money within the spending plan, you do, as a board, have the ability to take money out of one of the reserves during the
Right,
course of the
right.
year and appropriate if you had an emergency. So that also exists. So even if we, we're short, or we're like, wow, we don't have too much in flexibility, we use the bus money, you would still be able to do that. So, you have to have that flexibility, so.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? All right, so I'm going to ask this. If I ask it the wrong way, feel free to correct me. So I'm going to ask for a motion to, under Section 5 Business, to vote on A, which is adoption of the 2018-19 school budget, as well as B, which is amending the capital reserve with the language that's set forth in the agenda. So-
Janine's fixing the number in the resolution.
Can I just state one thing, or just ask a question first, and then state, and then before
Sure.
we vote? The first is this budget presentation available online for the public? Okay. So
And
then-
Tim, also, not just the presentation, but the actual budget book with all the line items will be posted as well. Yeah,
Perfect.
So
So-
there'll be much more detail.
So recognizing that, I just want to state for the public, there are some additional pages that you can go through at your leisure that goes through the budget expenditure summary. So if you're interested to see the ways in which, this slightly more than $50 million budget is allocated out through expenditures, please go online, look at it, page through it. We're available for questions. But it's all there in front of you to go through, and we're happy to address it.
And I'll just add one more thing, that once, the way the law is set forth, we vote on this, and then this is what gets presented on voting day to the public, and we do not have the power to change it in that 30-day-ish interim. Okay, so with that, can I have a motion for what I said before?
So moved.
Thank you. And a second.
Second.
All in favor? Wonderful. Congratulations, Tony.
Oh,
You
cool.
passed your first
No,
budget.
congratulations to all of them. We passed here.
I really did want to say, this was a new process for many of us on the Finance Committee, certainly a new process for Tony, who came from a learning background, not a business background, and we spent a lot of time, we talked about, our philosophical views towards this, we drilled down on many, many different areas of this. It was a long and thoughtful process. It was an extremely transparent process. We made sure, Janine was terrific about noticing these meetings. We made sure that the documentation was out. We had public at our meeting, not very much, but we did, and it was just, I'm very proud of the process. I want to give a very special thank you to Maureen, because Maureen is everything when it comes to the budget. I can't even start to list. And
Thank you.
You not only were you prepared and you had all the documents for us, you patiently answered all of our relentless questions. And you really, you're just absolutely invaluable. So anyway, thank you to everybody. Thank you to, I don't want to just say just the Finance Committee, because we often had much more than the Finance Committee. So just thank you to our public, thank you to our superintendent, Maureen, Janine, the board, and really everybody who contributed. It was a very thoughtful, growthful process. Okay, with that.
Amend the capital reserve as well.
Oh, but I asked
did that
for,
together.
yeah, we
Sorry.
did that together, okay. So next, we have our business items under C, and I'll just ask if anybody needs to pull anything out of that, or if we can do that as a consent agenda. Okay, Maureen, I did email you some questions, but we can talk about them later. We don't have to talk about them tonight. Okay, so may I have a motion to adopt the business items listed under C? Number 5C. And a second, please? All in favor? Okay. Okay, next we'll move on to item D, which is the placement and/or services for CSE and CPSE. May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second? All in favor? Personnel, are there any comments that you needed to make about personnel, or should we just go through?
So I would quickly point out, just so you know, that we are, as I mentioned earlier, accepting resignation for the purposes of retirement from Dr. Zuck, who is one of our school psychologists up at Hillside. Up at Hillside. And so we are sad to see her go. Also, Bev Lucas, who is one of our teacher assistants, she's also resigning for the purposes of retirement. And also, the board is being asked to approve a new, I don't know where it is. Guidance, sorry. Personnel, our guidance counselor at the middle school, replacing Sue Horowitz. So we will invite all those folks to the May 15th meeting, where we'll honor our retirees, our tenurees, and our new appointees. But just a couple of highlights that I think are important there.
Okay, any questions under personnel? And we have termination, leaves of absences, appointments, resignations, and retirements. Does anybody need to pull anything out of there, or can we vote as a consent agenda? Okay, may I have a motion to approve all those items? Thank you. And a second? All in favor? Okay. Approval of the minutes from the last meeting. May I have it's a March 19th meeting. May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor? I'm sorry.
March 19th.
And I'm just going to abstain only because I wasn't here and I've only watched half of it, so I just don't think I can accurately vote. Okay, moving on, committee reports, facilities. Who would like to present on facilities?
Well, we met yesterday, right? We met last night.
Yes, I know. We've had a lot of meetings lately.
I think everyone was there, so there was a lot of people there.
Been a lot.
Yeah.
Last night's meeting.
Yes, right, that was...
Yeah, we met with the architects and went over again some of the plans for the buildings that we would be considering for the bond that we're going to be starting to put together and introduce to the district for a lot of necessary repairs, adjustments, changes in the buildings. And it feels like it's just, still feels like it's the beginning of going through their plans and lots of questions. And they have a lot of really interesting ideas and possibilities. And I think it's going to take a lot of thought on our part about what we want to do, what's feasible for us to do, and how we think about a bond, and be able to plan that and then present it to the district in a way that people will feel comfortable with.
It's responsible, right? And I think we have a good, not to interrupt you, but we had a nice amount of community engagement as well. We had various community members and different community members that came out this time than last time. And some of the same folks, which is great. And Maureen, very much facilitated a great conversation. Also, our architects were able to answer a bunch of questions. And I think in looking at next steps, it's really kind of drilling down now and coming up with a number that everyone feels comfortable with, and then kind of working backwards to say, all right, what projects can kind of fit into that number. We talked a little bit about also just, sort of parallel situation that's unfolding is the waterfront development and what impact that might have on this, and how important it might be for people who are on that committee to kind of keep an ear open to what's happening with that development process. Because, if a building goes...
coffee this week with the woman who's running the waterfront committee, and it's very much in the early stages. For those of you who aren't familiar with how the process works, I mean, there's not many tools the town has to really have an impact on what gets built there. Zoning's the only one, because it's not owned by any of the town. It's private property. It's currently zoned light commercial, which significantly decreases the value of. There's not many commercial places that want to build there, so you're going to have owners of that property advocating very hard to get away with whatever they can get away with, and that would, I'm sure they'd love to build 10-story condos there if they could, right? And so, there's the way the process is going to unfold. There's actually, what I didn't realize, there's 3 parcels down there. One's owned by BP, one's owned by Exxon, and one's owned by a company, Ulrich? Ulrich, which is like a PE-backed. And I think it's the one where they tore the building down is BP, kind of down at the south side of town at the water is Exxon, and then it seems like kind of more towards the road going to the dump is where Ulrich owns. Is that right?
They're pretty far down to the south.
Yeah, they're pretty far down.
Off the edge.
So the way the process is going to work is, I think the committee has someone who does development in the city on it, so someone who knows developers and development pretty well, a few urban planners. The woman running it is Kate Starr, who's has a background in just broad investing background, and some designers are on it. They're going to then bring a recommendation for zoning to the town. So it's obviously all in very early stages. She did say that they all seem very keenly aware of the impact of, say, condos and how that's a lower tax, you can't tax as much with condos. They want to keep, they'd love to get it at a bare minimum revenue neutral, so that it's generating, some good tax revenue for the town, but hopefully creating some public space as well.
But they have to recognize revenue neutral for the town is different than revenue neutral for
the school. And that's a serious issue.
So,
Put a bunch of kids in, we got...
I mean, if you end up
space
with 100
constraints.
children that come from there up here, that dramatically changes your cost of running the district. Whereas for them, it's like their garbage pickup's not going to be that much different, or their costs are not as great. But
they didn't seem aware of that from like the condo perspective. They seem keenly aware of that, but are there other concerns besides that?
Well, you also, it's just a question of 2 things you want to look at is how it's being taxed, because condos and co-ops are taxed as commercial properties, and therefore they're not taxed at the high level that a single-family home would be taxed at. So they're about a third of the value. So if you have a 3-bedroom condo versus a 3-bedroom home, you get about 3 times the revenue off the 3-bedroom home that you would off the 3-bedroom condo. So that's a really big difference if you're talking about revenues to the schools and you still have 3 kids. So that's one of the big issues there in terms of what they actually build and how they do it. And there are some ways around that, but they just have to be really conscious of that. The other concern is just there's a break-even point where if you get 200 kids, that's probably more than the system can handle. So it's just a question of the volume, and I don't think the volume is being talked about that it's that great. 60 kids, it's a little harder to see, if you end up with an extra 30 kids at the elementary school, it's two more, one or two more classes, and, you might end up with space problems, and so we just have to...
What is your, have we been involved in anything quite this size before?
Yeah, well, Clairwood.
Last time they...
Development? No, like the only other properties that...
There are other properties where it's the same, but...
Yeah, but I'm
See, I think
talking
this is a
about-
really key thing to keep in mind, and that we either have to make sure we communicate, or somebody that I think a lot of people just think it's sort of the tax, how condos get taxed, or not.
But they're aware of that. It doesn't, they're aware.
But I don't think they're aware of the fact that if you build all these new properties and families move in with kids...
No, I think that they're very aware of that. I don't know that they're quite aware of all the numbers, and it's all been shaken
And
out.
they typically-
it's all about percentage-wise, right? I mean, it's all about the percent. I don't understand enough how zoning works, and how, there's definitely height limitations, which is going to limit stuff. There's density limitations, which will limit stuff. And, my sense is they're very well, I think we have to stay very much
That's what I mean. Just have to be
engaged,
part of the
right?
process and recognize what that would be. They also, typically in the past, developers tend to really underestimate the number of kids that are going to come out of a project.
Yeah,
So they'll have like
They didn't-
18
she didn't-
apartments, and they'll say, well, there are 18 two-bedroom apartments, you'll get 7 kids.
She did, I don't know how you get this into the zoning, but she did mention this idea that they're looking at opportunities for micro-housing, which I guess is very attractive to retirees, which is one-bedroom studios, which tend to significantly limit the number of kids that move in, and you're close to town, and it's walking, and there's a development, But it
Number
would
of units you can place.
theoretically, right, so, look, I'm not a zoning expert, I don't know how you do this through zoning and whatnot, except for density, but, suffice it to say, I'm happy to stay, engaged, if someone
That's
else
important.
can stay engaged as well, because, I did ask, can we be a liaison? They didn't want any liaisons from any other community, people in
interesting.
town. So,
One question for you, Eileen, that you might know the answer to this, and if you don't, that's fine as well, but Ardsley has dealt with this in a significant way, and one of the things that was taking place last summer, and I think it's just, I asked the question largely just so that the public who's watching it, and this draws this to their attention, there were any number of lawn signs advocating against a particular project. So to what degree do projects that are brought forward by this development committee, waterfront development committee, if you know the answer, require a public vote?
they don't.
It requires the
village.
The village, just the zoning board of the village to say, okay.
So what was the, and I don't want to go too far afield, obviously, the time, et cetera, but there was a particular issue or proposition being voted in Ardsley with respect to a development, which was the yard signs. I can find
That was
you know
the
what?
big-
Well, no, but
Jefferson
the town is the
Song
one
River
that
Road.
sets, the zoning is
I know.
law, and the town board will set the zoning law. This committee is being set up as a set of professionals to recommend to the town. And so they will hire actually zoning experts that are going to put together a proposed zoning plan. It's going to land on the Board of Trustees' desk. They're going to read it and they're going to say, we accept this proposal, or we'll tweak this, or we'll tweak that, and we will now vote it into law.
Yeah. So I guess I would just note, I'm speaking for myself because the degree to which you're highlighting how quickly this is, or how quickly it has the potential to move and how quickly it has the potential to just be in the hands of the trustees. We were all, I think, aware of barges possibly being moored in the Hudson River, which was going to affect our views and potential, wildlife, environmental, etc. This has the potential to affect the functioning of buildings where we have a clear physical capacity constraint. So this is essentially just to say, and basically it's kind of a light bulb to me, we as a community need to be
Pay
involved
attention.
before we're
Well,
trying
there's two.
to.
There's the community and then there's the school, which
Yeah.
is,
And
obviously,
actually, I
we're
put those
concerned
two
about
hands.
both,
But I do put those two hand in hand because I think
Yeah.
our community is uniquely, or if not uniquely, among a rare few to which the degree that the community is actively engaged in what's really going on in the school. So anyway, that's interesting
So
stuff.
I think they have meetings either once or twice a month right now. It's probably good for maybe a couple people, if you can go down, just to go
Yeah.
listen to what they're talking about, how they're talking about it. As someone who's been for 2 years involved with zoning issues with the town, it's an eye-opening experience to understand how it all goes down. So it's a bit of a sausage factory sometimes.
As the sole board member that doesn't actually live in the village, but only in the school district of Hastings, I just want to just remind people that, that the school district is larger than the village. And this, when we were talking before about a resource officer, I was like wondering whether maybe because part of the school district is really an unincorporated Greenberg, would Greenberg kind of kick in some of the money towards it? In this case, you have the people that live where I live really have absolutely no say in village government, and so for someone living on the other side of the sawmill to say to a village trustee, I'd like this or that, I mean, I don't vote for the mayor, I don't vote for the trustees. And I also bring this up just because since I'm going to be going off the board come the end of June, it's just something I think the school district should keep in mind, which is that we do tend, in the 10 years I've been on the board, to think of the two as the one and the same, but it's really not, I mean, there are certain things that living in unincorporated Greenberg instead of in Hastings, we don't get over there. And you can't sort of assume that everything that's being, all the things about spending, the sort of interplay between the village and the district and things that we let the village do, or the village lets the school district do. It's not the exact same group of people. It's an overlap. There's a Venn diagram. But it's just something to keep in mind. Sometimes it's beneficial. Sometimes, I mean, this goes back to, like, we've never gotten, we don't get the cable TV channel over there where you can watch the school board meetings, because that's not what Cablevision gives to the people over there, because we're not in the village of Hastings. So, I mean, there's just a lot of little things that are not the same, going back to the...
But I like the idea of getting them to pay for the resources.
Well,
No, that's a good point. That's a
no,
very good point.
but yeah, I mean, so I just bring it up because in 2 months, chances are you won't have someone from unincorporated Greenberg on the board anymore. So,
Thank you.
One question I had about the bond was like 36 million, and then the next time was at 41 million. What was the?
And those are not the numbers we're going to float, okay?
So this,
This
what
was
we're
everything
talking
under
about
the
is
sun.
everything in the
Right.
kitchen sink, right?
What was the
So,
added 5 million?
Well, part of it was based upon discussions we had that as we talked about the
You have to look
different
at the whole-
the different uses,
No, I
the
looked
different...
at it, it was 36
The different
room.
things that if we were to do in the auditorium, it was actually, though, we started off with just looking at square footage numbers,
we
but
did-
then with
we added the middle
with
school
speaking
auditorium.
with the greater community, that some things came out of that changed some of what we thought would be the better, some different renovations. So again, it's
Some of it
everything.
had to do with the,
Some things were, like you were there in the beginning,
Yeah.
when we talked about the middle school
that's where a
auditorium.
big
But
part.
That was a whole
that's
new
changed
piece of-
dramatically because
Okay.
that now includes the renovation. If we were to do that, we would also renovate 6 other classrooms that were related to that renovation. And then, like, depending on what we were doing at Hillside also, again, these are big ideas. I don't want to scare anybody with the building addition, then, repurposing different rooms. And as we walk through, if that were to be, like, we were like, we'll move the library here, so that was just everything. And that would be a full-scale reno.
And along those lines, I did just want to put out there to anybody who is watching, who does not live in unincorporated Greenberg, that we really were pleased that we have a lot of public being at the meeting, and I will just encourage, we notice these meetings, the more people we have who are involved, I think the better chance we have of coming up with a bond that our community really embraces. And again, the bond, as we've said all the time, I can't go into the mechanics of it. Maureen can at a later time. It's a very favorable way for us to finance something. There's much more savings to our taxpayers than doing it through a budget. So it's something we really want to take advantage of while we can.
So just on that, before we end, I just want to say to Tony, bringing it up, and Lisa, what you said, the other thing about the community involvement is that there were people there with children in every school, and as well as a member there who hasn't had children in the school for years. So it was really a wide range of community participation, which I think was great.
Yeah, it's what we want. And keep it coming.
Great committee, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, finance. I don't know if we need to report out on finance because we were just
All about the
Part of the
trying.
budget.
It's budget, yeah. Okay, so I think we can skip that. Special education. Christina, do you want to report?
Yeah, I'll report out, but both Tony and Lisa are there, so you can kind of fill in as well. So we met, and Tony and Lisa were there, Laura and Tess were there, as well as parents from high school, middle school, and some from elementary school as well. And there were a couple of areas that we were talking about. One area was RTI and its implementation as it pertains to the audit, but also historically how RTI has been implemented. So one of the things that was reported out, just for anybody who's listening who doesn't know, in terms of RTI and reading, and this sort of goes back to the public comment a little bit earlier, in Hillside there are a number of checkpoints. So there are interventions there. There are a number of, there's the Fontes and Pinnell reading assessment, there's the DIBELS, which can identify students. Of course, not always, but it is something that's there that can potentially identify students. Students who are identified in Hillside, they go through the RTI process. It's my understanding that the RTI process has been underway in Hillside, although I think they're building it, they're making it better, and not that it was bad before, but that, there's a progression. At Hillside, there has been a history of that.
And Christina, I'll just add, I didn't realize this at the meeting, that RTI is mandated by law, but only through K through 4.
Right. But very often it goes through middle school, and then also in the high school, there isn't necessarily an RTI or MTSS, but there should be systems in place. And part of the discussion that I think the parents and everybody who's present was having is that there really are not very many systems we're not exactly even sure, to be honest with you.
I can provide some information if you like in terms of a conversation that I did have with our.
Right.
I don't want to interrupt.
But no. Let me, if I could just say that at this meeting, we had received correspondence prior to the meeting requesting that there be data that could be shared with the participants of the meeting regarding where the RTI process was in the middle school, because that was part of the recommendation of the audit of Dr. Katzman. There was also questions about students' literacy levels at both the middle school and high school. And there were a number of other questions that via SEPTA had been asked. And a large part of our conversation had to do with the fact that we couldn't have a conversation because there was no data that was at that time compiled and ready to share. While Laura and Tesfa could speak specifically to special education, that's their area. When it comes to things like RTI and AIS, that's the area of the buildings. So So we needed data from the buildings in order to sort of really flesh out, like, what's going on? How much progress have we made? Where are we going with this? What are the next steps? And I think the parents in the room really were ready to have that conversation, but that conversation was stalled. Would you agree?
Yeah, the data wasn't there, and that was the problem. It was requested, it was assumed that the speakers would know, and it wasn't, and I think there was a lot of frustration, understandably.
Absolutely. I think that some of the parents in the room felt that, we're a year into the audit, and this type of information should be available.
When's the next meeting?
The next meeting, there's a
I think Laura's gonna
Dibbles,
send
not a
around
Dibbles.
a,
The Dibbles is the assessment. There's
not
a
set yet.
doodle. Is it a doodle? There's a doodle, not a Dibbles. There's a doodle that's going to go around.
So is there
That hasn't gone around yet.
a plan
and that
to...
was
That hasn't
a
gone
week
around
ago.
yet.
Is there a plan to have the data for that meeting? And is there going to be like an iterative process to get
Yeah.
2 weeks in advance of the meeting, a first cut of the data? Because it's kind of pointless, just throwing it out there, it's just a little bit pointless if the data, some data comes to the meeting and it's not the data that participants want. So if you do,
Right.
just kind of like, you do a first cut at the data 2 weeks before the meeting and just get to some level of data that's actually, if you're the point person receiving the data,
Yeah.
kind of as understanding what the broader attendees are looking for, just so that you can sort of make some forward progress on the data gathering point.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I also think that, like, some of the data that was available, there was partly a discussion on the literacy specialist, so it was reported out by Laura and Husfa that according to their files, there's 3 to 5 students in the high school who would benefit from a literacy specialist. And for those who don't know, a literacy specialist is the new term for reading specialist. Just how many students do we have in the high school? And only 3 to 5 students are students who are in need of a reading specialist. And I think that there are parents in the room that were really speaking to what Jen Cunningham was talking about before. There are students, they were talking about their own children who had not been identified until 7th grade, 10th grade. And some of these parents were also even talking about not just literacy specialists, but also even program modifications that aren't necessarily being put in place, or they're put in place not with efficacy, sorry. Like, for example, there was a discussion about graphic organizers. That's a very sort of, I don't want to say basic, but common thing that could turn up on an IEP. There are parents talking about how they have to create their own graphic organizers for their children, when that's really the job of either the gen ed teacher or the special education teacher or somebody. Then there was another parent who said that somebody had come into her child's classroom and had given her child a graphic organizer. And you would have thought it was like somebody's birthday. I mean, they were that grateful for something that is supposed to just be, well, legally done, because an IEP is a legal document. So I think that parents there were also extraordinarily grateful to the change of some of the tone and tenor that has been connected with the special education department. I think parents recognize that Laura and Tesfa are really running their IEP meetings and 504 meetings. Well, technically, do they run the 504 meetings? No. In any event, and program reviews, parents are not leaving there, and they're not going into the meeting, and they're not leaving the meetings feeling a sense of anxiety and despair, which is fantastic. But that being said, I think collectively the parents thought that there still is work to be done. Towards the end of the meeting, we sort of summarized a little bit about some of the next steps. And am I leaving anything out about the meeting?
No, I think you covered it.
So some of the next step as a to-do list is to consider how to go about screening middle school and high school students in particular, because if we don't have a way to screen them in terms of their literacy, how do we know where they're at? There are just too many parents who are reporting, a discrepancy between a student's grade level and their reading ability. So there needs to be some sort of screening. We also talked about how to get RTI up and running faster in Farragut Middle School. We're not exactly sure at that point in time what was going on. We hadn't had an update. And while RTI is not necessarily in the high school, there were questions about AIS in high school. Lots of people talk about AIS in high school and in middle school. Well, how does AIS necessarily address some of the issues that we're talking about? AIS writing certainly doesn't address reading issues, and AIS math certainly doesn't address reading issues. It might address math issues, and it might address writing issues, but then where's the reading component? The math literacy specialist as part of the budget was something I think that people really liked, and math and literacy, but there still was questions about there were still questions about the literacy specialist. One of the things that was discussed was Dr. Katzman. As part of the audit, she is, as part of the settlement, she's supposed to be coming back in order to do sort of a review, and that's going to take place. The district needs to reach out to her in order to set it up for this summer. I don't know where the district is in terms of reaching out. But there was a suggestion made that Dr. Katzman could come back earlier, not in the capacity of the settlement, but sort of as somebody who has a finger on what's going on in terms of the audit and the school district, and she could potentially make recommendations on how to help the district address professional development, because I think parents at this meeting had concerns about PD, to address the weaknesses that were raised in the audit, and in order for Dr. Katzman to provide feedback on RTI, specifically in AIS and FMS in high school, possibly to help in terms of screening and ways that children can be screened. Let's see. Ideally, to report back, to have Dr. Katzman be able to report back before the end of the school year and not like June, like by the end of May, if at all possible. So, right? Isn't that kind of
Yeah, because I think part of the parameters is that in the current settlement agreement, the dates that are set are that she's supposed to come back, actually, to review the implementation. No, she can't start that review till after June 2018, and then there's supposed to be a presentation in the fall. Now, that said, that the cycle was delayed because the audit took longer, but those dates have not been modified.
Yeah, and I'm looking back here at my notes, and it says that, there also in terms of Farragut, how can the data from Hillside inform Farragut, not just from 4th to 5th grade, but if you're looking at students who are receiving either are classified 504 or receiving RTI Tier 2, Tier 3 services at Hillside, and you already know that they're receiving this in, 2nd grade or 3rd grade, well, that in some way, shape, or form could hopefully inform Farragut in terms of their programming and their planning moving forward. Certainly, students can go, I don't want to say in and out, but if they make progress, students may not necessarily need RTI, or things can change. But by the same token, that data at Hillside, which currently is being collected, could be used as something that could inform moving forward. Another question was, I guess, who's going to, and I still don't know the answer to this question, who contacts Dr. Katzman? Not just for this in sort of formal evaluation, but also in terms of in order for us to comply with the audit. And I think that's a question that maybe by now we know. Anything else?
No,
today?
but what I was going to say is, yeah, I mean, as we said, a big problem was the data wasn't there on the interventions that are happening at Farragut and the high school, which is not at all to say that it's not happening. The principals were not invited to this meeting. So I know in the aftermath, you and I spoke, and we spoke to Tony about Tony then finding out this information. I don't know if you're at a place where it's ready to share, if you want to give a summary or a future, and I will also throw out to you, do we know if Dr. Katzman has been contacted?
I will follow up with Laura. I don't know right now. No. Laura is typically the person that's been in contact with Dr. Katzman.
And so far, so you followed up now with the Farragut and high school principals about the work that's going on there, and you have a lot of data.
Well, I have an understanding of their processes as it relates to MTSS, as it relates to RTI, whatever phrase we want to use to describe it, and what their processes are like, and how they collect data to identify kids, and what that looks like from the beginning to the end, if they're going towards classification or if they're being not classified.
So with the data that you've gotten, is the plan then to wait till the next special ed meeting to put it out there, or to crunch it and put it in a form ahead of time? I don't know. I don't know what you have. So, or have you got to the? Do you need to analyze the data first to figure out what's the best form of transmission?
I think we need to look at it a little more. Absolutely, yeah. This was just a conversation we had yesterday with the building principals. So,
okay.
And Laura. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the other thing is just, I think we should put it out there, is like, who owns this? I don't know who owns this.
I do.
Okay. All right. Just wanted clarification, thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions about the special ed Board of Ed committee meeting? Okay, old business. The revised calendar?
Yes, and there was just a change about when the half-days were assigned. We consulted with the HTA Executive Board and moved them from one date to another. So the shift is really just the half-days in November.
Okay. And Tony, we're still okay with the 11:45 dismissal that you said the state is?
The number, they won't, well, they're apparently opening another window.
I can speak to that, yeah.
They're giving us a hard time about passing time. Well, not giving it, they're saying they're not going to accept passing time, but we do have our schedule as it stands right now. We are within the hours.
We are. So it doesn't have, because we don't have to do the 1 o'clock. We're fine.
And in days where it's paired up with parent-teacher conferences or PD or something like that,
then
it counts.
Yeah, right.
So,
okay.
We're fine.
Sorry, so tell me again the half-day issue that we're...
So this year, the way that hours were counted, it was counted by week. And so you had to have 27 and a half hours for secondary and 25 hours for elementary.
Yep.
And so if you had a half day, it compromised your ability to meet to count that day, if you will.
Yep.
The state is now talking about looking at it as a holistic number.
Okay.
900 hours for elementary and 990 for secondary.
Aggregate, yeah.
Yeah. And so you look at that collective number.
Okay.
Okay, are there any questions on the calendar, on the revised calendar? Okay, may I have a motion to adopt the revised calendar under 9A? And a second?
Second?
All in favor? Okay. Policies. Donna. Donna, is this going to be your last policies report?
Unless they get the last, there's usually one more update.
All right.
It depends. Last year, I don't think the last update came until over the summer, but usually they come during the school year, so we'd have another policy committee meeting. And
I feel like we should give you like the Cecil B. DeMille Policy Award or something.
Yeah.
No, and I will thank you. It's a pain in the neck job, and you've been amazing.
Jody, were you going to ask a question?
Yeah, I don't know what your schedule is and when you're meeting again, but I was wondering, and I don't know what's coming up, but whether we should put this off till the next meeting, just because we have to...
Well, there's nothing really I have nothing to say other
Okay.
than, because I explained what these things were last time. These are just second reads, so
Okay.
unless anyone had any questions after having read them, I would just recommend that we adopt them.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
May I have
Yeah.
a motion to adopt them?
So moved.
And a second? Second. All in favor? Okay. BOCES vote. We are voting on their administrative budget and their trustees, and which is all laid out in the attachment, which I'm sure everyone has read cover to cover. May I have a motion to adopt the BOCES budget and to vote on the trustees as listed?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay. Public comment? Pardon?
Janine, this isn't one of the votes where we're supposed to go around and each vote on it, is it?
Oh, the BOCES vote.
The BOCES vote?
Yes.
Oh, I realized, by the way, after the public comment, I had an old business. I'll go back to it.
Because I feel like sometimes we have to do that, and if we don't, then we have to do it at the next meeting. It doesn't say that?
Well, no, because it says A, aye and nay, but everybody, since it's unanimous, it's okay.
All right,
Okay,
just
good.
making sure.
Okay.
Hi.
Jen.
So this is very quick. I'm Jennifer Destin, and I'm a resident of the community. And I wasn't going to speak tonight because I'm sort of critical thinking brain dead. However,
Welcome to the club.
there were some comments in the discussion around school safety that, for me, triggered questions I'd want to know. So I'm just sharing those questions for you.
Fine.
I feel like the conversation around identifying children who have violence tendencies and indicators around them, I would just want to know how, because I think, and this I think is coming from my SEPTA experience, there's such a nexus between mental health and behavioral issues and how things are projected and how they are received, that it sort of scares me to think that we'd be labeling children with indicators of violence. If, however, it does if it is validated by some research, that's a good thing, then I would just want to know what happens then. If you are targeted, I just know that was a bad word, but if you are identified as having those indicators, what are the next steps? Are there interventions, or is it just a red flag in your file, right? The notion of a dedicated police officer in the school, again, I mean, I grew up in the Bronx. We had community police officers in our neighborhood, and I went to a school where you had to go through a metal detector to go into school, which was fine. However, there were children who sometimes, I think, were criminalized in school situations because the person who was the keeper of the gate had a criminal background. Right? That's the way they viewed the world. So I would just really want to make sure that any police officer who comes to the school doesn't only have training around being a school resource officer, but has really sophisticated training and understanding. I mean, we've all seen stories in newspapers where people who are on the spectrum sometimes get hurt because they don't stop when someone says stop. I think that is part of school safety as well. And the last thing I wanted to say was, I understand we all want to keep our children safe. I want to keep my daughter safe. But I also think we need to make sure not to respond in a reactive way and to really sort of get a sense of just how likely, I mean, I don't want to put it in out there, but it just, all of it concerned me. I'm sure you guys will ask all those questions, but they are the ones that came to my mind as I was...
Jennifer, those are great points, and I'm just going to reiterate what we said as a board when we had that hearing right after the shootings in Florida, that, you know, obviously it's the board's decision in the end, but just how much we value the community's input, because there are so many ways to go, and we know that our community is going to have strong feelings in a number of ways, and it is critical that we understand that.
And I'll just say, I love your points.
I do too.
All three of them.
Great.
So,
Great point.
No, go ahead.
That's it.
Okay. Because I know we go into board comment now. And
I just actually realized I had an old business that I forgot to bring up, if you don't mind. It's short and sweet. I just want to go back to an action that we had taken where we wrote a letter to the Board of Regents and the State Education Department about a month or two ago, and it was about computerized testing, where there had been a protesting group that had asked the state to expedite every school district being on computerized testing. And we as a board wrote and we said, please lead this decision up to the districts. And I don't know if you all know, but in last week's testing, about half the school districts in New York were using computerized testing, and the servers were down for hours. And I think there's some more computerized testing today, and there were problems, and it has been riddled with problems. So I just wanted to say that I'm very proud of our board for speaking out and about letting the distance.
Now we have the data to back up the request.
Pardon? Pardon?
Now we have the evidence or the data to back up the request.
Yes. Okay, now, Jody, you had a...
Yeah, I just want to say, this is very hard to talk about, but it's really on the heels of what you... So, obviously, I think we need to give a lot of thought to the security audit and what's being proposed. And I know that on the, is it Health and Safety Committee, that we met with Dr. Maraglio a while back.
Oh, he regularly comes.
No, he comes to all our meetings.
Yeah.
He's here like...
And I've always had an incredibly strong reaction to him, and not positive. I'm putting it out there. And I know that we see things differently, but I feel that there is a way, and I feel like this is very difficult to talk about, but I think we have to really balance, obviously, the safety and welfare of our children comes absolutely first. There is no question. I always have the sense, though, that there's a way that he kind of plays to kind of a fear factor, and there's just a way that he talks that I have a problem with. And maybe it's the psychologist in me, but I always feel like there's this fear and there's a lot of aggression in the way that he talks. And as I said to Tony, the thing that really upsets me is his little brochure here is, if you look at the picture on the brochure with the person holding a gun. I mean, it just feels like, what are you trying to communicate? And I think what he has to offer in terms of what we should be thinking about broadly is really important. And I know that I can easily fall into, I am the person who would say, you know, I don't want this to be like a prison. I want it to be, I am all of the person that he described, that he hears all these things from. There's no question. You know, that I don't want this to be a correctional facility. And I think we're going to have to work hard to come up with a balance. And I know I'm going to end on, I mean, there are already things being done that I might have questioned, and I appreciate that it's important, but I want us to think about what we're doing and how we're spending money on it. Obviously, if it needs to be spent on these things, we will find a way to do that, but I just have to say that we could all get very, very frightened if we hear stories of what happens in other districts. And I'm not saying it couldn't happen here, because it could. But the whole issue of whether somebody who is there to judge if somebody is, a child is potentially violent, or when he talks about monitoring suspicious activity, and, you know, there's just something about it that feels a little bit excessive to me. I know you...
know, I mean, I don't disagree. I've spoken to him, but similar to the chief and the police officers from Hastings, when they come in, they're always talking about, we need shotguns in our... I mean, because they come from a very different lens.
Yeah. Yes, they do.
And although, even for myself, I'm like, what is the likelihood that you need to have all this, like, high-power guns? As you know, I mean, you've said these are public meetings that our police department speaks of the type of things that they have, that I'm surprised that they have, but they're preparing for the worst case scenario. And I think they're always coming at it, unfortunately.
They do have a
the
really
chief
different
comes
lens.
at it all the time from that. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like we're living in like a third world country sometimes in the way the way they're talking about things that happen here. But it is their lens is like the...
Well, it's their lens, but it's also their lens coming from their own experiences and their own view of the world and their own view of people and their own biases that they come at things with, too.
I think Matt does get it, because we've had a conversation. It's not that there's a recommendation or a budget recommendation for an SRO in this budget, because that would be a much longer term conversation if that was even to be considered. But I think we all are in agreement that it would not be, a lot of schools, when they look for people like this, they a lot of times look for police officers who either have some other type of background, because most police officers nowadays have multiple degrees, and a lot of them have either even sometimes education backgrounds or psychology. So you certainly, if we were to go that route, we would be, like, if school districts, when they do go that route, they don't just take somebody on the force.
Right, I understand, and I think we know, some of us know that for years when Dave Bloomer was the youth officer in the school, I think that worked very well, you know.
And there is like a value, and I agree, because he focuses on the armed, which I think there's a lot of other benefits to it, like you had mentioned with Bloomer, who my older son and his friends, where if they knew something was going on,
They went
there
right
was
to
a lot of
him.
intervention, and he, I mean, he did do a lot of, he was invaluable, I think.
But I just say, we'll talk about it another
Yeah.
point, but I think we have to,
But most of these, the people who do the security, because I've sat at many, there's two or three people who do it locally.
Right.
They all come off that way, Jody.
right, but it's
They'll
this
all come off
feeling
that
of
way.
instilling fear in people, and so
I know.
then you better do stuff, and
But he isn't like that all the time. I mean, I think, and he works well with our building level.
I don't know.
Our
He
principals
was like that
all
in the meetings that
teachers,
I was
the nurse-
at.
I know you, yeah.
Guys, can I move us along? Don't get me wrong, it's not, it's a very
No,
important
that's
point. It's just.
no,
it's
I
not
just
important.
had to go on the...
No, and thank you for the comment. Okay, and now, this is not on our agenda, but we're going to make a motion to move into executive session for the purpose of,
Janine, do you have the language?
It is here.
oh, okay.
This is how you advertise. Attorney-client privilege, discuss confidential student matters related to contract negotiations.
Okay, may I have a motion
So moved.
and a second?
Second?
No, we're not. We're just covering.
All in favor?
Right.
Okay, thank you. So with